Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for High Velocity Radio.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of High Velocity Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today on the show, we have Janice Brathwaite, and she is the CEO and founder of Workplace Transformations. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, I'm excited to learn what you're up to. Tell us a little bit about Workplace Transformations. How you serving folks?
Well, a while back, probably in 2019, I had come up with this idea, and I was thinking about why haven't things gotten better for employees? I mean, I've been in the workforce quite a long time, and it just doesn't seem like we're making any headway. So the question I asked myself is, what's causing that? What kinds of things are causing that? And as I continue to dig deeper and deeper, I realized that it was the foundation, the culture is the foundation of an organization. And if there's cracks in that foundation, those are going to be the things that are going to cause you problems. And a lot of people just try to ignore them and say that they'll go away. So I was working in healthcare at the time. And when COVID came along, I had to kind of put this on the back burner because there was no time when you were in healthcare to actually be doing anything else but healthcare. But once things kind of, slowed down a little bit, I made a decision that I was going to leave healthcare, the place I was working, and go do this full time because I really feel there's a value in what I have to offer.
So when you say do this full time, what exactly does that mean? Are people coming to you and saying, I would like to transform my workplace? I feel like we have a culture problem, or are you proactively going up to people and saying you might have a culture problem? Like how does your business work?
I actually reach out to customers, to people in organizations. And because I know a lot about healthcare, a lot of my focus has been, talking to people in the healthcare area because I was in healthcare for 17 years. So I pretty much know what's going on, especially today. There's a lot of upheaval. So it's really a good time to try to take a look at what's going on. So what I do is I reach out to people. I write articles. I do marketing. I have a marketing person and I work with a PR person. And just trying to get the name out there because the company and it's fairly new. So building your brand, as you probably know, is one of the toughest things to do. You have to do it in many different ways because you want to get to many different audiences. So that's what I've been doing when reaching out to my contacts in healthcare. I think I'm going to broaden my scope a little bit. I was in community health, but I think right now I need to broaden that out to make it more around medical services, not just community health.
So what are kind of some of the symptoms that an organization would be having where culture might be at the heart of it? Are there some symptoms or maybe some clues that these organizations are feeling a pain, but they aren't kind of putting their finger on what the cause is?
Right. One of the first places I worked with, they called me in because they said they were having problems on one particular floor of this facility, which I thought was kind of interesting in itself. And they wanted me to dig in and find out why that was. Why was that particular floor, having all of these problems? So I met with the nurses first. And of course, nurses are very outspoken, and they'll tell you exactly like it is. So they were telling me a story about how they were going to outsource some of the triage stuff that the healthcare organization was doing. And they told the nurses on a Friday that they were outsourcing it on Monday. So the nurses felt like, well, they didn't ask us anything about how do you do this? What kind of questions should you be asking our patients? If you get this kind of situation, this is how you could handle it. So they just felt like there was no communication. They were kind of blindsided by all of this. And this is it's pretty much across a lot of organizations. Communication, when I do assessments, communication comes back as the most important thing, but the thing that's not being done very well. So the next group I went to was the doctors. And I got in the meeting and the CEO was there And the doctors all filed in. And I turned it over to the CEO to kind of explain what was going on. And they're like, what? I don't know anything about this. Why weren't we told that this was going to be the topic of conversation? So I knew right then, because they had no base for a conversation at all. As we started to kind of, pull the layers away, one of the doctors said to me, or said to the group, I'm doing the best I can, but nobody seems to recognize it. And then they started to cry. I'm like, oh my God, this is really bad. So, then I went to the CEO and said, the doctors they're not in a good place. They feel like they're not getting either the support or the communication that they need to get their jobs done. The next group was the front line. And the front line was most candid about everything and really brought up the similar types of situations in their area, the things like around communication, engagement, around recognition. Recognition is another big thing that always comes up. People don't feel like they're being recognized for the work that they're doing. And it's not just getting a paycheck. It's your boss coming to you and saying, hey, you did a good job on that today. Good job. It doesn't have to be some big convoluted process. It has to be mindfulness. Leadership has to be mindful that we're dealing with human beings, and human beings need to know where they stand at certain times. So when I went back to the CEO and to kind of debrief, she said, I told you what they were going to do. They were going to blame us for it. I almost started laughing because I was like, well, it is you. I'm saying to myself, it is you. Everything they're saying is pointing right back at leadership. So I gave them a whole plan, which they implemented, which was very surprising, and a very, very encouraging. And they went from a really bad place to getting, just recently, I saw it on LinkedIn, they received a $30 million grant from the foundation. So they have completely turned that organization around.
And then what were some of your recommendations to, how were you going to attack the improving of the communication and the, stop taking people for granted?
Right. I think a lot of times that leaders think have a town hall and then we'll talk to everybody together. And that sometimes works. It depends on what the conversation is. But it really is about, meeting with your staff, managers, senior leaders, and leaders need to meet more with their staff and be candid and clear about what they're planning to do or what the problems are. A lot of times they kind of skirt around the problems. I was telling a funny story the other day that I actually wrote in my newsletter, that when I was working in one organization, I used to joke about this. I'd be walking out of the conference room and I'd turn to one of my colleagues and say, did you notice that big hump underneath the rug in the conference room? And they'd say, what are you talking about? There's a big hump there. And they're like, well, what is it? I said, it's everything that we sucked under the rug all these years. But it's not going to go away. I think sometimes people think it's just magically going to, things will magically get better. And it doesn't. You have to really, be intentional about what you're doing. So communication and recognition are the top two. And I know communication is a difficult thing. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, but as a leader, hopefully you've learned some techniques to do that, which I'm not seeing a lot of that right now.
Now, do you find that culture is one of those things that if you're not mindful about it and you're not intentional about it, it's going to form without any input from you? A culture is going to exist whether you're kind of proactively trying to nudge it or encourage it to be a certain way, because it's like branding. Even if you're not putting any effort into it, it's happening. So how do you recommend that people put more intentionality around kind of the things that are important? Like you're saying, how recognition and communication are important. You have to put things in place that encourage that type of behavior if you want it to continue to be important. Otherwise, it'll just be a mess, and it'll just kind of you're not going to have any kind of say over the matter. It's just going to happen in its own haphazard way.
Right. When I think about that, I think about, what they say about how would you eat an elephant one bite at a time? In order to find out what's going on, you really have to do an assessment. And you're not going to be able to solve everything at the same time. I mean, it depends. I mean, if there's maybe 5 things you might be able to do, but it's going to be over time. And that's why it's so important to have a plan, on how to do this. And that's where I come in. I do all of I review all of the assessments and do all of the crunching of numbers. And then I come back with what I call a playbook that they can use to actually implement change in the organization.
So, but in order for that to occur, they have to, number one, be self-aware there's a problem. And number two, give you permission to go out and kind of do the research you need to do in order to come up with the plan. And then hopefully they'll, act on it.
Right. Well, that's why I start at the top. That's where I know if this organization is really serious about this. A lot of times people think you can push change from the bottom up. You can't. It has to be top down. If the leader or the CEO or whoever the leader is leading that organization doesn't believe that it's important, then it's not going to be important. They have to, and it really takes me talking to them and kind of guiding them and giving them examples of things and asking them questions. So, what are 2 of the things that you find you're struggling with the most in the organization? So I can get an idea, and then I can kind of use those as levers to kind of get the door open a little bit. And then slowly, I start to bring them on board more and more and more. Then I move to senior leadership and I work with them and get their input. And then so on down the line within an organization so that everybody knows what's going on. You can't do this without bringing your staff into it because they're the ones that are going to do the assessment. So they have to be on board. The CEO has to be on board. There's no doubt about it.
Now, is the problem are they seeing a problem in terms of employee retention or turnover? Are those kind of the clues for the leaders that something's amiss? Like, is that kind of the big flashing light when you're having a hard time hiring or you're having a lot of turnover in an area? Are those the things that are like, okay, this has to be triaged at some point?
Well, yeah. I mean, recruitment and retention is, and I mean, especially in the healthcare field, is really a high priority, and they're having a lot of difficulty getting people to work in that particular field, and they're not the only ones, but there are others out there as well. But that is a definite sign that something's wrong, because if you can't recruit people, you ask yourself the question: well, what is it about this organization that's making people not want to work here? Because people talk. And they tell each other what's going on. Like, I don't know if you really want to work there. I don't know. I've heard some bad things. And the retention is really, the recruitment is external, but the retention is internal. And that's where you really now you want to keep the people that you've got. And I have this thing it's a process called value-driven hiring. So my theory is, if someone doesn't believe what you believe, then they're probably not going to stay with you. And this becomes especially important. I think it's important in all industries. But how do you find out if they believe what you believe? And it's clued into, oh yeah, I really feel like, I could catch on to this process. I could catch on to this desire, this hope, this mission that this organization has. You've got to interview differently. And that's what a lot of people don't do.
So they're not kind of making sure that the values are aligned, that they're all kind of trying to get to the same place ultimately.
Right. And it's not just in the interview, it's in the job posting. I mean, you got to call out what you're looking for because you want to attract the people who believe it and you want to detract the people that don't believe it. So you're not wasting your time. I mean, I've seen this multiple times. Somebody gets in a job and they're on the front desk and they're talking to patients. And a lot of times they're thinking, well, I don't understand. Why are they getting healthcare? And I have to pay for mine. Why are they getting this for nothing? That is not the person you want when you're when you're working with the patients. You don't want somebody to say that, to think that. So you've got to figure out what are their real thoughts are. And this became clear to me. I used to run an AmeriCorps program in the organization in which I worked. And the first year I got there and I just did like the regular interviewing and these people were going to be sent out to various organizations. So they weren't in the same building as me. They were going to be somewhere else. So I went through it and I realized that I wasn't getting the quality of person that I really needed to be able to send them out to someplace else and know they were going to work. So then I started, working on it, thinking about it, reading, and I came up with value-based hiring is the key. So I changed my whole process of interviewing. I looked at their resume. I looked at, a lot of these people right out of college, so they didn't have extensive resumes, but I'd look at their resume and then I'd ask them questions like, so tell me how you deal with conflict. And I wouldn't say anything after that. Just let them talk because you don't want to lead them. You want them to say exactly what they need. And the more I did that, the better the quality of the person and the happier the places that I was sending them to were because they didn't have to babysit them. They came in, they were ready to work, they wanted to do it, and they were there for all the right reasons.
Right. So it was a better fit. You were able to get better fits faster.
Yes, absolutely.
That reminds me of somebody I interviewed. They work in leadership of a large fast food company, and they were in charge of hiring the people, the frontline people that were dealing with the customer. And they said they only hired people who were natural smilers. They wanted people that had kind of that cheery disposition naturally, because you can't really train that, and you can't make a non-smiler a smiler. So, when they're looking to hire, that's a quality they look for because they're already close, in terms of customer service if the person is smiling just naturally.
I mean, it become clear to me, you can teach someone a skill. If they're somewhat intelligent, you can teach them a skill, but you can't teach them a value. And I was talking to someone a while back and I said, my belief is that by the time you're 5 years old, you have all your base values, don't hurt other people, don't take what doesn't belong to you. And then over time, as you get older, you start to say, well, maybe I need that value. I don't think I'm doing really good there with that particular thing. So you start to take on value. So if someone wants to take on a value, they will. But you can't force them to.
Yeah, it's going to be voluntary.
So, you just waste your time if you keep, pushing, but they're not gonna be able to get to where you want them to be. And I like that. I like that thing about smiling because it does tell something about the person. You don't want somebody grumpy coming in, when you're dealing with the public. So that makes good sense.
Now, how has the transition been for you working as an employee at different organizations and doing the type of mentoring and coaching you were doing there to the type of work you're doing now where you're the entrepreneur that's coming in, But I would guess you're doing kind of similar work in the actual activities you're doing, but from an entrepreneurial standpoint versus an employee standpoint, was that a difficult transformation for you?
Not really, because I always said when I was working, I felt like I was working for myself. And luckily I had some managers and leaders that would allow me to do that. So I was kind of setting my own course, even internally. And I think a lot of times they'd say, well, if you don't fall off the rails, it'll be good. I tell you, a program I developed is called Grow Your Own. And while I was there, and it was at this organization, and it was about, instead of, always looking outside for people, let's develop the people that are in the organization to become medical center assistants or dental assistants. And I just thought about that. And I sat down, I thought about it, and I said, I think this might work. And if people don't think I'm crazy, I think they'll go along with it. And they did. So I always felt like an independent. I really did. I'm a very independent anyhow, but I've always felt of myself that way. And I always knew what I needed to go and ask questions on, like it was financial or something was involved, it was confidential. I would go to a leader and say, hey, I want to do this, but I'm not sure, if that's the right thing to do, just to get feedback. So I knew my boundaries. I say empowerment is like a highway. When you're on the highway, I don't know how many lanes you have down where you are, but say there's 3 lanes, and you can move your car from lane to lane. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. But if you go too far to one side, you'll hit the median. If you go too far to the other side, you probably go down in a ditch. So the empowerment is not just like everybody does anything they want to do. There are boundaries around it. But people need to know what those boundaries are. You can't think it's intuitive that they're going to know. But if you're in this, if you've got room to move, I think you'll be pretty happy. And I think that's what I had. I had room to move.
Right. They were giving you autonomy, and you obviously have the expertise and the trust of the organization that they were letting you, play out your ideas, within the parameters that were within the organization. So that's kudos to you.
So it wasn't, I'm not saying it's an easy transition, but I felt like, just take what you've learned and, transfer it over into something bigger. And this is what I really love about this is the creativity. I mean, I really love about being an entrepreneur. I love the fact that I can be creative and develop things. And, and I spoke at a conference in Vermont, and it's on intergenerational understanding in the workplace, which seems to be a very big topic these days. And I developed this tool for them, and that they could take to start the conversation around what are the things that we share in common as generations, and what are the things that might be different, and how do we work together with the differences, the things that are different. And it went off really, really well. I'm going to do it again in Illinois in October, at a conference. So, so that is something that, people wouldn't, well, let me just back up. Culture is a big thing. When you say culture, people go, they glaze over because they don't know what you're talking about. But intergenerational understanding in the workforce is part of your culture. So all these things that are causing the problems that these organizations are saying we have a difficulty with the Gen Zs, Gen Ys, that's part of your culture. It's not something you can't work with. And the one thing I don't like about the way people have been handling it is I don't like people stereotyping other people. And I think once you give those little letters to people start thinking of whoever's in that group in a certain way, whether that way or not. So I'm trying to make them start thinking in a different way. Let's get rid of that. These are individuals. I'm sure when I came into the workforce, they said some of the same things about me. Oh my God, those boomers, they want everything. Don't want anybody to tell them what to do. They want to, they know loyalty to the company. I mean, sure, they said all those things, nothing different than what they're saying today. So why are we doing this? Why are we assigning labels to people?
Yeah, it seems counterproductive. I don't think that's helping. I guess in some ways it's a shortcut for people, so they don't have to make the effort to get to know the individual. They just kind of make a blanket assessment.
Right. And so, you see, what you think you see, sometimes that's what you're going to see.
Right, exactly. You're going to have a bias, and then everything's going to fit into it. You're not going to give the person the benefit of the doubt. You're going to just assume. It just opens up a can of worms, and none of them are good.
Right. No, it's so that's that's how I've been approaching it, and using employee resource groups to actually deal with this issue, to get people to know each other on it, not just by their letter, but by who they are.
Right. And going back to your values, like if we just do things around values, there's going to be a lot more commonality if you've chosen the right folks that have similar values.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Spot on.
Now, what's the typical point of entry for you in these organizations? The speaking? Do you come in to do speaking, or you do a workshop, and then that gives you kind of the credibility, and then you can build on some successes to get more and more work from the organization?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing now is that the speaking has become a way to really touch a lot of people all at the same time. And rather than reaching out to the individual units, sometimes they bring all these people together. Just so happens it's a healthcare conference and in community health. And so they're going to bring all of the community health centers together. So I'm talking to a whole group of people in different areas who are dealing with probably different things and some of the same things.
Right. So organizations and associations are having you come and speak on these kind of topics to help educate their folks on different strategies on how to manage them?
Correct. That's right now as the hot one is. And I started this with a college who wanted me to speak on this, which I thought was really interesting. But they had a workforce group of employers that they wanted me to speak to. That was part of the program they were running. And so I went out, I put together a presentation, and I realized when I was sitting in the room that as I was presenting, that people really are struggling with this. You've hit on something here, and I said, I can do, I could do things on value-driven hiring. And I've got a lot of different topics I can talk about. But right now, I think this is one of the pain points that organizations are really struggling.
So what do you need more of? How can we help you?
Well, I'd like to get more opportunities to speak in front of organizations. And it's not just healthcare. I was in the for-profit world for many years, worked with Xerox, Motorola, various top line companies. So I understand that environment as well, which I think is a plus. Speaking, just reaching out to me. If they're on LinkedIn, I have a newsletter that I put out. This month it was on In the Midst of a Storm, and it was talking about the things that healthcare organizations are going through right now, and what do they do if in the future if something comes up that they're not expecting. So how do you do like a emergency preparedness for organizational turmoil?
Yeah, so you're available to speak when it comes to any type of this culture, leadership, the management side of things, the building resilience. It sounds like that there's a lot of topics to cover based on your expertise, and it doesn't have to be healthcare because that you might have worked in healthcare for a minute, but these are kind of universal challenges for organizations.
Everybody's dealing with it. I have family members that are in the industry, and I hear them talking about things, and they're no different than what I heard people talk about in healthcare. So it's universal. This is a universal problem, and unless people start using some tools to address this, this is going to continue. And the other thing now, we have this thing around bringing people back to the office, which is causing, some concern from employees. And, but, I was a real advocate of, working from home. I've kind of changed a little bit. I've taken a little bit of a turn because I do think it affects collaboration. And people say, well, we're only on Teams anyhow. Well, no, but you do. I mean, I had the ability to have Zoom when I was in the office, but we always had meetings, face-to-face meetings. We didn't go just on a Zoom and, somebody down the hallway was sitting in their office and I could have walked down there and had a conversation with them. So I'm a little bit on the fence around that one. I don't think it's as good as people think it is.
Yeah, I think you miss out on some of these accidental conversations and being a fly on the wall. And there's other types of ways to learn and interact and bond that it's difficult to do over Zoom or some of these virtual platforms. I think there's a lot of value to just running into somebody and just chatting for 2 seconds and getting an answer or getting some help, or asking a question where that's a little trickier in kind of a virtual setting.
And you can't get the feel for how the person's really reacting to this.
Right.
It's a little box. But I'm sure you've been in many meetings yourself, and you can tell by body language how things are going.
And then a lot of young people are not learning how to read that. Like they're missing out on some of that kind of not, like you're saying, the body language and things like that, the more subtle nuances of communication that maybe are difficult to translate through a Zoom call.
Exactly. So, and can be a lot of, misunderstandings. I've seen it happen myself in Zoom meetings, misunderstandings amongst individuals. And, it's just, to me, it's not as productive as people think it is. And I understand the reason why people want to do this. But I say to myself, before COVID, didn't I go into work 5 days a week? And now, and I'm not the only one that went in. So what's the problem? This was because we had an epidemic. People don't seem to remember that. It wasn't because, the companies all decided you all can work from home now. You can work from home. I used to be able to work from home 1 day a week, maybe on a Friday, but I always had to ask if I could do it. And so it's not necessary. And people say, when I'm working from home, I can do other things. I can go places. I can take my kids. Well, what did you do when you work 5 days a week?
Right.
Kids not go anywhere.
Somehow it got done. Somehow.
Yeah. So I'm not really buying that. But my friends, I get a lot of pushback from my friends about this because they think that, it's great. And okay, FaceTime is good, but Zoom won't get you there.
Right. Well, if somebody wants to connect with you, is there a website? Is there a best way to connect with you and your team?
Yes. My email is Janice at WPTransformation, not with no S.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can reach me there where I post a newsletter every month. And I have a website. That's my website is WP Transformations, transformation.com. And so they can get me at any of those places.
Good stuff. Well, Janice, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You're doing such important work, and we appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. This is Lee Cantor. We'll see you all next time on High Velocity Radio.